Good morning. I want to welcome you guys. I am so glad to see all of you guys who are on seat, as well as those who are joining us online this morning as we continue our quest in learning about standing and learning about paying attention. Those are tough words to hear, aren't they? I don't know about you, but growing up, I heard those words way too often. Pay attention, James Frank. And as always, when you said, your first name and your middle name, you knew you were in really bad trouble. And yet, those words, pay attention, biblically speaking, are used 1,047 times in the Bible. 1,047 times. And they bring a lot of promise. If we pay attention to certain things, that there are great rewards as a result of paying attention. And they also warn us of some things that can be some drastic consequences when we don't pay attention. And so you've probably experienced that principle at work of whether or not you pay attention or not, one way or another. You know that whether it's in your dating life or driving or mowing, that we tend to drift in the direction that our attention is, no matter which way. You're driving down the street and you start watching something, you start edging over into the other lane. You've seen it happen lots of times. I was driving in Tulsa yesterday, and it was obvious this person was looking at something in this and I was right behind her. I was coming up the other lane, and she began drifting over to my lane. I said she. It's not always women drivers. I know, guys, but she began drifting over there, and I had to apply an attention maker. I tapped my horn, and she startled, and she went way back over the other side. And so when we pay attention, we tend to drift in a particular way, and what gets our attention influences our direction, and our direction ultimately determines our destination in life. So as your attention goes, so goes your life. And whoever or whatever it is that has captured your attention at this very moment is influencing the direction of your life, for the good or for the bad. But now that you're aware of that, you can leverage it, you can have the opportunity to embrace that principle and leverage it for your own benefit. You're in a position to choose your destination. Choose what you pay attention to rather than discovering that destination once you've arrived. But choosing does require change in our life, and a change does not come easily, especially when it requires to redirect our attention away from people and things that have kind of an emotional grip upon our life. The writer of the book of Hebrews says this. He says, we must pay more careful attention, therefore, to what we have heard, so that we do not drift away. And so there's an important aspect of this whole idea of paying attention. So this month, we have turned our attention towards the idea of courage. Courage to stand in the midst of pressure to bow. And we've been, whenever we see that we're being kind of pushed to the limit on things, we have a choice to make. Will we choose the path of least resistance, or will we have the courage to stand? And the only way we can stand is if we pay attention to our deepest held values that we have in our life. Today, we're going to look at one of the most recognizable stories in all the Old Testament. And if I say Daniel and what would you finish that sentence with? Lion's den. I don't care whether you've always been in church or never been in church. This story is so well known that when you say Daniel and there's a picture that comes to mind, and there's probably a song that goes with it if you've grown up in church. We just know that story, and yet even though we know the story really well, there's some incredible things within that story that we want to look at. 3 weeks ago, when we started this journey with Daniel, he was a very young man, exiled from his homeland, taken into the king's court. And we come now to not quite the end of his life, but it's near the end of his life. At this stage in Daniel chapter 6, which is kind of placed not in chronological order within the book of Daniel, but he's about 80 years old, all right? And sometimes when we talk about Daniel and the lion's den, we always think about, like I was when I grew up, or in a camp, they would say, as a young kid, dare to be a Daniel. You remember those words? Dare to be a Daniel. Well, it's not only for young kids. And if you're 80 plus years old this morning and you're with us, I want to challenge you to dare be a Daniel, because Daniel, when this story happened, was at least 80, maybe older than that, whenever he comes before Darius the Mede, who had conquered Babylon. It ceased to be the Babylonian kingdom and became the kingdom of the Medes and the Persians. Now, here's the whole story, all right? History records that Darius, this guy, he was a Mede. He was part of the Median and Persian Empire, was kind of a administrative genius. And whenever he came to power in Babylon, he began to reorganize the whole government to make sure, well, probably to make sure the taxes flowed upward towards him. But he had everything kind of divided down. He was a guy who delegated things. He was a guy who put things in slots. Administratively, he was great. And the deal was he appointed 120 guys by the name of satraps, all right? That's a great word. Say it with me, satrap. You say, why is that a great word? Well, it means kingdom protector, all right? So these satraps were kingdom protectors. And then he puts 3 people called administrators, managers, whatever you want to call them, over the 120. And Daniel was one of those 3. And their job was to protect against rebellion, to levy taxes, to guard the financial affairs of the nation, to balance the national checkbook. Boy, wouldn't that be nice? Could one of those guys run for our office here in the United States? I can't believe I said that. No political statements involved there. But that was what they were doing. So Daniel chapter 6 says this. It pleased Darius to appoint 120 satraps throughout the kingdom, with 3 administrators over them, one of whom was Daniel. The satraps, remember, they are what? Kingdom protectors. They were made accountable to them, one of whom was Daniel, so that the king might not suffer loss. And so here's this whole situation. Their job is to protect the kingdom. They're overseeing the satraps. Verse 3 says, so Daniel distinguished himself among the administrators and the satraps by his exceptional qualities, that the king planned to put him in charge over the whole kingdom. Now, all throughout Daniel's life, we see him kind of standing out, serving with great wisdom. He seemed to have amazing people skills. And the amazing thing is, this is the 3rd, and depends on how you count, possibly the 4th king that Daniel has served under. I don't know of anybody in a cabinet position of one of our presidents that lasts through 4 different administrations, including a total change of party. And this guy was able to have such an ability, such a competence about him that it didn't matter who the king was. They said, we want Daniel as a part of our administrators. We want him a part as being a leader within the kingdom because he was so sharp. And so Darius recognizes Daniel, whole new kingdom setup, and he says, I want you to be number 1 in my kingdom. Seems like a great day for Daniel, doesn't it? He gets promoted. He still gets to serve his God. He can be a great witness. Top job in the whole kingdom. But the reality is, what looks like a promotion from the outside actually produces a lot of trouble from the inside. The other 2 administrators that didn't get picked, guess what they started doing? They got jealous. They kind of go Hunger Games on him, We're going to take out this guy. We're going to take him down. But Daniel stands strong with supernatural strength that can only come from a long-term developed faith relationship with God. He stands the test. And so from Daniel chapter 6, what I want to do this morning is show you 3 truths to help you stand strong this morning as we talk about paying attention to courage. How do we stand strong? The first truth is this. When God raises you up, expect people to what? Tear you down. Say that with me. When God raises you up, expect people to tear you down. Gosh, I wish it weren't so, don't you? Don't you wish that whenever perhaps you get a promotion that everybody rejoices with you, and they just are glad that you received this promotion. They're glad of the new position. But a lot of times, the people that you think would be most excited for you are the most critical, the most jealous, because you have that position now. Maybe some of you in the realm of your faith, you're really excited about your faith in Christ, and you're finding other people are beginning to make fun of you, people that used to be your friends. And there may be even some Christians who are like, well, I know you're excited right now, but one of these days you're going to settle down and be miserable like all the rest of us, And so it's like you can't possibly be excited about your faith. Or maybe God speaks to you maybe very clearly about something more controversial. You're going to downsize. You're going to get out of debt. You're going to be a stay-at-home parent maybe, or you want to invest in your kids in a different way, you know? And people look at you and you say, culturally, that's not popular, and so they criticize you. You're raised up, people tear you down. And you see this story played out exactly for us in Daniel chapter 6. It says this in verse 4. It says, at this time, or at this situation, the administrators and the satraps tried to find grounds for charges against Daniel in the conduct of his government affairs. If you run for public office, people are going to look for all the dirt they can find on you, and it's going to find its way into some commercial. If you notice that in our election year. Now, not saying that it happens all the time, just every election year. Now, but we are unable to do so because he was what? Trustworthy. In other words, they looked for the dirt on Daniel. You know, they're looking for dirt in his closet. They couldn't find anything. And that's amazing, isn't it? They could find, it goes on to say, they could find no corruption within him. And he was neither corrupt nor negligent. So these men said, we will never find any basis for charges against this man Daniel unless it has something to do with the law of his God. We tried to dig up some dirt on him. We can't find anything against him, you know. He seems very competent. But since he has this relationship with his God, he's got to be unintelligent because he believes in God. And so they devise a plot to try to attack him. Here's one of the problems that I see seems to crop up more for Christians on the western side of the hemisphere than it does on Christians through the rest of the world. So often we believe, hey, if I'm serving God, I shouldn't have to face any opposition. I mean, I'm trying to do what God, tells me to do. I shouldn't have people coming against me. I should never face a hard time. But the reality is, that's not reality. We battle against flesh and blood. We battle against the powers and principalities of this world. And whenever we're moving the kingdom forward, we can always expect resistance from the prince of darkness. And oftentimes the prince of darkness, unfortunately, works through people, even well-meaning people. In my first ministry that I had an elder in the church, and he gave me some very wise counsel. He said, James, if you're not ready to face opposition for your obedience to God, you're not ready to be used by God. Good stuff. That's good. I've been the youth minister at this church for about 4 or 5 months, and I planned this big event. It was during the '76 Olympics year, and we were going to have this Olympic type thing with the kids, and a little out of the norm for that church situation. And I had one couple in the church. They had no children, and when I was voted on to be the youth minister, I received 2 votes, 2 negative votes. That was it. And you only get 2. You wonder who they were. And I didn't have to wonder, because I came out of the congregational meeting. They came up and told me, we don't need a youth minister at this church. I don't know why we're going to spend money on you. You're too young to even be a youth minister. So anyway, I knew that they didn't like the fact that I was the youth minister of the church. Well, in doing this Olympics, I sent out this letter, and they were very appalled that we were going to have this big party for the youth, because kids need to be studying the Word of God all the time. But we're also going to have some fun. And so I did not handle it real well, and so this same elder said, we need to go by and visit them, because you need to apologize to them. And I'm going, I'm not apologizing. He said, no, really, you need to apologize. And so I said, okay. So he takes me with him. And he said, I'm really disappointed in you. Oh, great. Let's just pile on now while I'm in the dirt, And he said, the reason I'm so disappointed, it's taking you 5 months for you to tick them off. He said, I thought you could do that a lot earlier. And sometimes you just got to realize that you're going to have to experience opposition when you try to do something for the kingdom of God. And so here's the situation, Daniel is standing out. He's standing up for his faith. He's standing strong. And sure enough, there's some opposition against him. Some of you may be experiencing that right now. And the other 2 administrators are like, we've got to stop him. So what do? If you read the story, they first of all come and butter up the king. Now, I don't know how they buttered up the king exactly, but they said, hey, king, we need to make this new law. We want to make you king for the month. If you're going, God for the month. If you're only going to be God for a month, you must not be a very good God, be real honest. He said, we're going to have a God for the month, and we'll have everybody pray for you for that month. They should not pray to anybody else but you, O king, because you're the greatest and the best, and yada, 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 yada. And they spoke to his vanity, and so he thought, yeah, I need to be king for the month. And Darius is like many kings, he's vulnerable to pride, and many of the kings, and still do, try to almost deify themselves. And so he went a part of this God for the month deal. Now that created a little problem for Daniel, because Daniel was a tremendous man of prayer. It's interesting. I wonder if someone made a law like that today, how many people would worry because we are known as people of prayer, not to some deified king, but to God himself. And they knew that this would create a problem for Daniel because he was so faithful to prayer. And so if Dan continued to pray, he would die. He had to make the decision. He kind of had three options. The first option he had is he could stop praying, He could have quite honestly said, he could have just kind of faked it. He could have said, God, I've been serving you for 80 years. It's okay to take a month off from praying, right? We're cool with that, aren't we, God? It's okay. God, I'd be much more effective here than I would be dead being lunch meat for the lions. And so he said, I'll just not pray for a month because, God, you know my heart. You know my heart, God. And it's okay if I don't pray for a month, right? That's one option he had. Second option he could have done is he could have prayed silently. He could have just faked it. That's probably, be honest, that's probably what I would have done. I'm just not going to pray aloud. Down my head, just close my eyes, meditate. What are you doing, James? Not a thing. Just been sitting here thinking right now about the universe. Are you praying? No, not me. Not praying at all. And that's what a lot of us would have done. Third option would be that he could keep praying publicly, praying aloud, and he could risk death as a result of that. And that's what he was really willing to do because his faith in God was so strong. Now, I'm thinking of a question. What in the world built that kind of audacious faith in the life of Daniel? How did he have such deep faith in God that he was willing to stand strong in the face of possible death? Which leads us to the second thought that I think will encourage us to stand strong, and that's this. Kneeling to pray is what gives you strength to stand. Kneeling to pray is what gives you strength to stand. Verse 10 is so powerful. It says, now when Daniel learned that the decree had been published, he went home to the upstairs room where the windows opened toward Jerusalem, where just as he had done before. Isn't that amazing? They say you can only pray to Darius. And so Daniel goes home just like he's always done, goes up to his room, opens the window shade, stands up where everybody can see him, and begins to pray aloud to God 3 times a day, just like he had always done before. He didn't miss a beat. He knew that God was the most powerful thing in his life, and he was not going to miss that time with God at all. And so he just opens up. He didn't really announce it to anybody else. He didn't panic, but he just simply said, I need to pray about this. And it's amazing. He could have said, well, the only thing I have left to do now is pray. And sometimes we act out like prayer is the last thing in the world. And sometimes I wonder if when we think, I'll manipulate, I'll control, I'll do all this, and then nothing else works, I'll pray. I think that maybe God's standing up in heaven going, well, now you're up correct without a paddle. That's Southern gospel. That's Southern way. God would say that. You're in big trouble now because all you got me to call out. You can't manipulate anymore. All you've got to do is be able to call on me. And guys, the very first thing when opposition like this occurs, the very first place we need to go to is to our knees and pray. We come before the throne room of God. You and I, as followers of Jesus, have access to the creator and sustainer of the universe. We have the audience with the God who cares about the intimate needs in our life. And so we can talk to God about our needs. He hears the cry of those who are humble. He hears the cry of those who are in hurt. He hears the cry of every one of us. And he delights to move on our behalf. We can pray. Never ever think, all I can do is pray. No, we can pray. And notice, Daniel didn't announce his prayers to make a public show. He didn't go on Facebook and say, well, I'm not going to follow what King Darius says. You know, I'm going to seek the God of heaven. Hashtag I'm so spiritual. No, that's not what he did. He said, I'm absolutely and completely convinced that so much of the success of Daniel's life was based on some decisions that he made beforehand. Pre-decisions, if you will. Somewhere, at some time in his life, probably decades before this moment when he's in his 80s, Daniel made a decision. I'm going to seek God in prayer 3 times a day. He pre-decided long before there's a threat. I'm a child of God. I will seek him. I need his ongoing strength. I want to have the intimacy of continual communion with God. So 3 times a day, Daniel says, I pray. If you haven't decided beforehand, pre-decided on a plan to get to know God, chances are you're not ever going to get to know God. I know you say, well, I just don't know how I'm going to feel when I wake up in the morning. You decide before you wake up in the morning that you're going to spend some time with him. If it's 1 time a day, 2 times a day, or 3 times a day, or 20 times a day. I mean, you can talk with God throughout the day, and that's great. But to make it a priority in your life, you need to pre-decide. Decide beforehand. I'm going to spend this time with God because it's important to me. And if you don't decide that, you will probably never grow. I know you may think that that's being pretty judgmental. But the reality is, if you don't make that decision, you just won't meet with him. And so Daniel pre-decided. And notice what he did whenever he decided. He knelt before God in prayer. How did he have the strength to stand strong? He knelt before God in prayer. There are lots of different ways you can pray. I happen to think that different postures, changing postures from time to time in our prayer is a big help. There are times whenever I pray, I do like Daniel and I stand. Sometimes with my arms out. And sometimes it's generally when I'm trying to sing to him, and thankfully he's the only one that hears me sing, because the angels in heaven are going, can I give him lessons, or something like that. But there's a time to stand and pray. There's also times in your life when heartbreak is just eating at you, that the best position of all is just to get down on your knees and pray. Sometimes that means even spreading yourself out on the carpet. Sometimes it means getting your nose into the fibers of the carpet because you're just trying to get lower to be able to talk to him. And different postures in prayer kind of reflects an attitude towards God and an attitude of receiving what God has to say to us. The humility it takes for us at times to kneel is necessary in our lives. Because we are so prideful people that sometimes we need to acknowledge that God is God and I am not. And your posture makes a difference in that. If you're going to praise God in prayer, I've got to tell you, it took me a long time to get rid of my arthritic shoulders and hands to get them up in the air. But it's hard for me now not to worship and praise God with my hands down to my side. You say, I feel uncomfortable about it. Sometimes we need to feel a little uncomfortability to be able to acknowledge the greatness of who God is. So posture is so important. If you've never knelt before God in prayer, man, you're missing one of the most powerful postures of humility and surrender there is. You kneel down. Think of yourself as a little kid kneeling beside a bed. When you kneel down, there's a sense of reverence, of humility, of dependence. And there's times when kneeling is not enough. You've got to just get down on your face. And when life gives you something that knocks you down, seek God in prayer. Don't let it be the last resort. Let it be the first resort. And when life gives you more than you can stand, you kneel before him in prayer, and he'll give you the strength to stand. Now, I don't know what's going to happen in your life. I've had some conversations with different people throughout this series that said, you know, this whole series about stand is stirring some things within me. But at some point, if you're a follower of Jesus, you're going to have to take a stand. There's going to have to be some kind of courageous stand that you will make in your life. It may be against a particular cultural issue. It could be that you're taking a stand in your neighborhood. It could be that your kid doesn't play in a certain soccer league because there are just way too many games that takes him away from spiritual aspects of his life. It could be that you may need to break up with your boyfriend or girlfriend because he or she is pushing you to do things that would be displeasing to God. Break the heart of purity before God. It could be that you don't do a business deal because it lacks integrity, and you're going to trust God to provide with this. And in your mind, what's going on is this. What happens if my kid doesn't get a scholarship to play college soccer because he wasn't in a better league? Or what happens if I don't get a new boyfriend or girlfriend? Or what happens if I get overlooked or I don't get a promotion or end up losing my job because I didn't get the deal done? And I wished I could tell you that it's always going to work out just the way you want it, but I can't tell you that at all. Daniel would have asked, well, if the lions don't eat me and God doesn't rescue me, what's going to happen? That's a fair question, because there are other people in the Bible that had the same amount of faith that Daniel did, and for whatever reason, God didn't rescue them. Read the tail end of Hebrews chapter 11, and it talks about some of those people. Friends, we're not talking about a movie where the script's already been written. This is real life with a sovereign God whose ways are higher than ours. His understanding is different than ours. And he will often do things that doesn't make sense to us. But he is God and I'm not. So I cannot promise you if you take a stand that you're going to not face the consequences of it. That there's something that's not going to go against you. That people aren't going to resist you. That you're not going to be left out or overlooked or end up hurting or feeling worse off. The only promise I can make you is this, and that's the third point. When you do what's right, you can always trust the results with God. When you do what's right, you can always trust the results with God. And this is the part that's most difficult for us to understand. Daniel didn't know at the end of the story that this was going to be the middle of the story. He thought it was going to be the end of the story. He didn't realize that thousands of years later, millennium later, he's going to be a Sunday school lesson for centuries to come. He had no idea, none whatsoever, that it would end the way it ended. All he knew is that for 80 years, he had been faithful to God. So no matter what, Daniel the man will be faithful to his God. Period. No negotiation. For Daniel, there would be no but what ifs, or but how come, or this doesn't seem fair. God's been faithful to me, I've been faithful to him. You know, why wasn't turning out right? What Daniel says, God's been faithful to me. If he saves me, I'll trust him. If he doesn't save me, I'll still trust him. Now, what's interesting, the person that gets the least amount of sleep that night is Darius, not Daniel. Daniel refuses to give up prayer. They toss him into the lion's den. Darius is all upset because he made this law, and the law of the Medes and the Persians cannot change, so he knew he could not backtrack. And Daniel, even though he cared for Daniel, even though he respected Daniel, had to go to the lion's den. So he gets up in the morning, and he goes out, and he's had a bad night's sleep, and he immediately goes up and gets to the lion's pit to see where Daniel is. And he sees to see how he's doing, you know? And so what he does, he looks down, and he sees that Daniel made it through the night. The king is tricked. Feels like he's been tricked. 2 of his top 3 right-hand men deceives him, So he feels very, very betrayed. Now, I don't know what happened to Daniel in the lion's den. I don't know whether he had a great night's sleep because the cat, and these aren't kittens. You got to realize these are lions, all right? Hungry lions. I don't know whether they got around him and, purred while he went to sleep. I don't know that. Or maybe he was in the corner with his thumb in his mouth, curled in the fetal position. I don't know. We don't know what he did during the night. But I do know that Darius spent a bad night too, and he goes to check Daniel out, and he's not eating. And by the power of God, the mouths of the lions were shut. Now, I believe with all my heart this is a literal story that reflects the goodness and the power of God in Daniel's life. And so Darius runs over, and he says, Daniel, how are you doing? In verse 22 it says this. Daniel says, my God sent his angel, and he shut the mouths of the lions. They have not hurt me. I guess they became vegetarian lions for the night. They have not hurt me because I was found innocent in his sight. Nor have I ever done any wrong before you, your majesty. In other words, Darius, I've continued to serve you no matter what. And so he says, the king was overjoyed and gave orders to lift Daniel out of the den. And when Daniel was lifted from the den, what's that next part say? No wound was found in him. When you do what's right, you trust God with the results. Now, there were two guys who didn't do what was right. And the king called them in and said, you're going to be lion's lunch tonight. And the angel was perhaps tired from working all night. I don't know. They didn't protect those guys. And the king issued a decree that everyone in the kingdom should fear the God of Daniel. Because in Daniel's faithfulness to God, God was faithful to him. And even if God had chosen not to close the mouths of the lions, Daniel still would have said, my God has always been faithful to me. Now, I know that in this room, there are many of you today that are facing some sort of opposition. I know that. Remember, God raises people up. And when God raises people up, people tear them down. It's a part of it. Just realize that. You're going to encounter opposition. Deal with it. If you're going to be a good leader, you're going to be a great leader, you're going to do things that people don't like. That's a part of it. So here's Daniel's advice to you this morning in the King James Version. Quit whining. Suck it up. Because that's just part of life. Now, if you're facing opposition for your obedience to God, just expect it. Worry if you're not facing opposition, because that probably means you're not doing a whole lot. When God raises you up, people will tear you down. They will. But kneeling to pray gives you the strength to stand. And if you haven't predetermined that you're going to grow in intimacy with God, chances are pretty good you're not going to grow closer to God. Some of you, I hope, are under huge conviction this morning that you need to set apart some time to pray, some time to seek God, to make an intimate search for Him one of the top priorities of your life. Because when you do what is right, you can always trust God with the results. Now, when you've done everything else, what will we do? We will stand, because our God's been faithful to us through Jesus. He will always be faithful to us. He will always be faithful to us. He will always be faithful to us. I'm going to say that one more time. He will always be faithful to us. Let's pray for a second. As we close this morning, I'd like to ask kind of a broad question. How many of you would say that you're going through a specific trial right now because of your faith? Would you just raise your hands? Thank you. Thank you for your courage. Let me pray for you. Father, for those who are in the middle of opposition for people, I would ask that you would give them the strength to live just for you, an audience of one, not to fear, not to worry when they face that opposition, but to trust. I pray especially for those who are up against a battle, that in faith can remember to pray, that they will trust. And I ask, Father, that you would deliver. Let me shift gears. Keep your heads bowed if you would. As we talk about taking a stand for the things of God, you may recognize that you've never taken a stand for God at all. The reality is you're not serving him, and you don't know him, and you're not following him. You may be facing some kind of trial right now in your life. You may be facing a situation that is just chaos. I honestly believe, I can't necessarily prove this, but I honestly believe that sometimes God allows us to face a trial so that we have nowhere else to go but to him. Nowhere else. To look towards him, to call on him. You may recognize that you may have done some really stupid things, some sinful things, and you feel unworthy to come before God. And I just say, welcome to the club. We've all been there. We've all sinned before a holy God. The good news is that he loves you. There's nothing you can do to make him love you more. And he became one of us, in the person of his son Jesus, who was without sin and died and rose again, so that anyone who calls on his name, trusts him, follows him, will be forgiven, transformed. If that is you, in just a moment we're going to stand and sing a song of invitation. And the invitation is for you. The invitation to trust Jesus to be the leader and the forgiver of your life. Won't you come as we stand and we sing this morning?